Today, we're welcoming back an old friend of the show, Ben Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Ben, always great to have you.
David, it's always a pleasure. Glad to be back.
So, okay, I mean, how's Joe Biden doing so far?
You know, that's a big question. I feel like it's a loaded question, but if you actually are dealing fairly with Joe Biden, he's had some good and he's had some bad.
Yeah.
I am. There are a lot of people who are really grateful to have the stimulus checks, while it wasn't as much as we wanted it to be, and while it didn't include 15 an hour, it still helped a lot of people. And there are some good things in it, right? There's the attack that they have on poverty, right? This bill is supposed to cut childhood poverty by 42 to 45%. We'll see how that does. So I have to give them thumbs up on that, even though it's not everything. I think is really beneficial.
So one of the big things that was missing from the stimulus bill was the $15 minimum wage. My view on this is that the problem is that the group of Senate Democrats just isn't left enough. It's not
Right.
that Kamala didn't push override the parliamentarian, because we saw with the vote that Democrats just didn't have the votes for $15 minimum wage. So for me, it's less about, oh, Joe and Kamala backed off by not overriding. It's there aren't enough Democrats in the Senate who want a $15 minimum wage. Do you see it that way, or do you think they should have overridden the parliamentarian?
Yeah, no, I definitely think they should have overridden the parliamentarian, if for no other reason than to give us the fight that we wanted and that we needed on that issue. However, you're not wrong, because then it would have been Kirsten Sinema, Joe Manchin,
Yeah.
and the other six who sabotaged it before. But that does speak to a bigger, broader problem. Like, we are going to have to send more progressive leaning senators there to get things done. And they absolutely are going to need to overturn or abolish the filibuster, or at least amend it, if they want to get anything done going forward.
Yeah, I want to talk about filibuster, but just to play out the overriding, in practice, we got the vote on including the minimum wage anyway. So we have a record of who voted no.
Yeah.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
the override just have created the fight, but in the end, just delayed getting people the cash?
Well, it depends on the timing of it. Like, it could have delayed it a little bit further, but also it really would have shown. And again, you make a great point. We know the 8 people who opposed it. But then also it would have been a little bit more pressure, because at that point it came down to it came down to the 50 vote versus what they needed in terms of the 60. So it gives them an opportunity to. It really gave the Democrats an out in the long run, and it leaves the suspicion that perhaps they didn't want to do it anyway.
Right.
But that's in the weeds. And, like, again, there are a lot of people who are just grateful to have these checks, because it took. I mean, we're so far into this pandemic, and 1,600 versus 2,000, $15 an hour. A lot of people want it. We can come back to it, but absolutely, I mean, I'm glad they got it done.
Yeah. If it had not happened, probably within 5 to 7 days of when it did, it probably
Yes.
goes on a list of failures for Joe Biden.
No, absolutely, because the clock was ticking. The same, my side of the equation, we were putting pressure on him from everywhere. Like, what we wanted 15 an hour, and we wanted those checks back in January.
Yeah.
So they did what they could do, and there's still enough good things in that bill that I think are going to have structural impacts, especially on childhood poverty. I can't overestimate that or overstate that, because that's a really significant move, and they're giving us signals that they want that to continue even after this bill has run its course.
So filibuster, there's the option of eliminating the filibuster with the pros and cons that come with that, including what happens the next time that Republicans are in control. There's the idea of reform of the filibuster, like, for example, requiring it to be an actual talking filibuster rather than popping in and extending debate and then leaving. There's the idea of you need 40 in the chamber to do it, rather than the absence of 60 keeps it going. Where are you kind of coming down on this debate right now?
For all intents and purposes, the willingness to, even from Joe Manchin, the willingness to at least amend the filibuster so that it is at a minimum a talking filibuster, is a positive signal. However, there are just so many impediments to to the actual progress that needs to happen immediately, especially coming from Georgia. Like, we absolutely are going to have to pass some type of voting rights legislation. It's got to, I know we already have HR1 in the House. It's got to pass the Senate. And the Republican Party absolutely will use a talking filibuster, and they will tough it out in order to kill that bill. So I think while it is encouraging that they want to amend it at a minimum, I don't know that a standing filibuster is going to be enough to actually beat back the desires of Republicans to suppress the vote across the country.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And actually, in thinking about a lot of the possible big initiatives that Joe Biden is considering. So last week we heard maybe the next big thing will be the tax reform plan.
Right.
This week we heard it might be a $3 trillion infrastructure plus schools and families. Now there's a lot more discussion about gun control in light of the two shootings. On most of these things, I'm expecting Republican support to not be close to zero, to be literally zero.
Yeah.
Given that, how should Joe Biden and Democrats even account for that in thinking of what to approach next?
No, I think they honestly are going to have to play hardball. And of course, see, the fear of the Republicans, Mitch McConnell did that a couple of videos twice, making threats about what they would do if the filibuster is abolished. I think the response to that from Democrats should be abolish a filibuster and run campaign ads every single day, letting Americans know exactly what Republicans want to do if they ever get back in power. So I think they're going to have to play some serious hardball and leverage the actual majority in this country to ensure that they don't get back in power in the near future.
One of the things I've been thinking about is trying to get out of like our politics bubble where we follow this stuff in a way that most people don't, and thinking like, for example, the debate around whether COVID cash passes with 60 or with 50.
Right.
No one who was waiting on the 1400 cares that it passed with 50 instead of 60, right? And along the same lines, when you think about something like gun control, we know gun control is less of a voting issue for people on the left than it is for people on the right. The right weaponizes it. Whether or not Joe Biden's doing anything, they're saying Biden's coming for your guns either way.
Absolutely.
Taxation, as an example, the narrative of Biden's raising your taxes, even if they're not really going up for 98% of households or whatever the case may be. Do you think that Joe Biden should be thinking about which of his ideas are voting issues versus which are not? Or should he just be doing what he thinks he can get done?
Actually, that's a really great question. And thank you. It is 1400 versus the 1600. I honestly think that he needs to just simply strike at what is going to be the best interest of the people, because this is a really good time where what he does that's in the best interest for the majority of the American people is actually really good politics. Even if you do have the Republicans on the other side of the aisle who are going to weaponize literally anything, they're going to call him a socialist when he's far from that. They're going to say he's coming to take their guns when he's not going to take their guns. We're talking about like a universal background check, which, we're talking about issues that have like 90% approval rating in some categories. So, he needs to play hardball with them and make his appeal to the American people in a very direct way. They need to communicate it. They need to go across the country and make sure, I know we're in a pandemic, but they need to make sure they take credit for all the good things that they're going to do, because if they don't, Republicans will vote against it and then try to take credit for it.
So on immigration to me feels like, if you watch the press briefings and you see how some reporters, even not right-wing reporters, are adopting the language that's been established by Republicans about a crisis at the border. We looked at the Border Patrol data. Seasonally, this is when crossings go up. You also have some kind of pent-up demand from 2020 where there was very little movement because of the pandemic. So it all seems in the range of what you would expect seasonally. Crisis to me is the wrong word. But I think they realize they're getting the most traction with it, and so that's why they're continuing to go with it. Kamala Harris now is being put in charge of handling what's going on at the border. What are the options even for what Joe Biden could and should be doing there?
despite his options, because it is a complicated issue and it
Yeah.
is a matter of capacity and the speed with which they can actually move, particularly children, through
Yep.
the system and make sure the children are not there longer than they're supposed to be there. There is a very nuanced and problematic issue there at the border in terms of processing and logistics.
Yeah.
There is no crisis though. And I appreciate you stating that, because even we saw MSNBC, they're using this language. Joe Scarborough has started using this language, and it is a throwback to the Obama administration, when this is literally the number one way they wanted to attack President Obama, because it does gain traction and it plays well with the conservative base. But that goes to the right-wing, inherent right-wing framing that we get from mainstream media anyway, right? And the irony of it is, of course, these headlines were not being promulgated during the Trump administration, right? When the numbers, I'm sure if we look at the numbers, there's going to be some overlap in terms of comparability. But now it is a talking point because this is all they have. This is what they're going to do. And so we need to we need to question these mainstream media outlets that are now shifting to the same paradigm where they are creating a crisis with their headlines versus the reality of the data.
Yeah, to me, the crisis language that's being used is not that different than China virus and Sleepy Joe, in the sense that the way you describe it is what frames it, even for people who are questioning what Peter Doocy says during, the Jen Psaki press briefings or whatever the case may be. But for me, so far, if you say what's the biggest mistake Joe Biden has made or the biggest failure, it's that, yes, he did do the executive order on removals and deportations. And then the Texas judge said, no, the justification is no good. And Biden's not done anything since. When I've read a lot of really good legal analyses that are, Biden could redo those executive orders to stop that with different legal justifications and really put courts in a position to say none of these justifications are valid. He just did one executive order and has kind of stepped away for now. I don't like that. That's for me one of the biggest things I think he's done wrong.
Yeah. I think that would be one of the number one things. The number two thing is the willingness to confront the issue head on for the difficulty that it actually is. I think Jen Psaki doesn't really do a really good service to the administration by trying to prevaricate around the complexity of the situation versus just simply saying that we don't have the capacity that we need to actually get these children out of these cages as soon as we, it's just really direct language is really necessary at this point, because if they're prevaricating too much, then we're going to see these images, and it's not just going to be the right. It's going to be a lot of people on the left, and justifiably so, because if we see these images, we may not know the technical difference between what's happening right now and what happened during the Trump administration. What we see are people in cages. And I think they have to just do the very difficult job of being straightforward and expanding the capacity. Don't just tell us the truth. Help us change the structural problems that are underneath it.
One of the things I would like to see would be to see Jen Psaki better prepared to lay it out and say, listen, the system we were handed was a disaster already. We want to fix it, but that will require, quote, growing government. But the Republicans are also against that. So the only way to do what they want us to do is by expanding resources, hiring more people, maybe in the short term having more facilities, but they also say we need small government. So how is it that they expect it to be fixed if we can't do any of the things that need to be done? She sometimes will say it's complex, but she'll never really frame it in those terms.
Right. So, and then trust the American people to handle the complexity, right? Now, I know that's asking a lot, all things considered, but
have you seen the interviews with anti-vax people?
I know.
Complexity is not playing well right now.
Well, but complexity will do well for the people who are actually genuinely concerned about it, right? You're going to have bad faith actors on both sides of the equations that no matter what this administration does, they're going to get attacked for it. That said, there are some of us who actually are simply concerned about making sure that it's not even just about keeping promises, but we're doing the absolute best that we can for the human lives that come and seek asylum in this country. And so for those of us who are operating in good faith, we can handle a moment of complexity versus, kind of dancing around the issue.
Have you been surprised by how effective the right-wing media apparatus and Republicans are at getting an idea to trickle all the way down to what I would call random Republican voters in diners in Oklahoma. Like when CNN goes in and they interview diners in Oklahoma or in Idaho or whatever. And ideas that start with like, Jim Jordan and Lauren Boebert and Fox and Friends about either a crisis at the border or stuff about mandatory vaccine, whatever. It gets so quickly to just random Republican voters in Oklahoma who just accept it.
Yeah. It's a continuation of the same echo chamber that they've mastered over the last 40 years. I mean, it used to start with Rush Limbaugh, and now it's being regurgitated through social media and on YouTube. Like YouTubers have the same talking points. People on Twitter have the same talking points. I mean, randoms and here's the other side of it, David. You now actively have citizens through social media contributing to and seeking out those talking points so that they can have something to say to their aunt that they don't like, who's a liberal on social media. So they're indoctrinating and propagandizing themselves.
What's funny about that is for the last at least 4 years, but arguably longer, the Republican Party has not been about policy, but it's been about preventing the left from doing anything and making the left look bad. That's almost the ideology now of the random Republican voter at Thanksgiving, who is not so much interested in policy, but in about what can I say to embarrass my liberal cousin or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, it's very personalized politics at this point, and it's the analogy of football teams couldn't be any truer because they're special pleading on behalf. I mean, they don't care that it's illogical. They don't care if it's downright a lie. They just need something so that they can post to own the libs. And that might be their family
question.
Members.
And then if it turns out that it's disinformation not allowed on social media, the fact that they're not allowed to post it becomes part of the story that they tell.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. There's no greater grievance than a conservative who has been flagged for propaganda.
That will be interesting to follow also, actually, during the Biden administration. Because one last thing on this, I've been thinking, okay, so they want to solve cancel culture. Is there any, quote, solution that is not incredibly authoritarian government involvement in private business?
I mean, you mean for them to solve cancel
Exactly.
culture?
When they say we need to fix cancel culture on social media, how do they imagine it being done without regulating the hell out of these platforms in a way that they claim to oppose?
I think what they really want is just to be able to use the N-word and not get in trouble. I think that's their standard. So maybe
if you allow that, they'll forgive the other stuff.
That's the end of cancel culture for them. Right. They want to be able to say anything they want to say without any responsibility. So I mean, the amount of government that would be required to come into, private corporations, private jobs, and to manage no responsibility for it's just a mess thinking about it.
Yeah, they want freedom from the consequences of speech, even if it's someone else's speech that is the consequence. Yeah,
absolutely.
We've been speaking with Ben Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. You can find him on, of course, YouTube, occasionally on TYT. Where else? What's your main hub right now, would you say?
I would say my main hub is the podcast format is still one of the strongest sides. So anywhere you get podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all those places, we're there.
Ben, always great having you on.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.